The night was colder than anyone could bear. The wind blew across the empty train station, making the metal boards rattle and the lamps flicker. Snowflakes fell slowly, covering the ground like a white blanket. The only sound was the echo of the wind and the faint whistle of a faraway train. A young woman named Emily stood near the wooden bench, holding a small brown suitcase. Her nurse's uniform was hidden under a long gray coat, but the thin fabric couldn't protect her from the icy air. Her hands were red and trembling, and her breath came out like small clouds of smoke. She looked down the empty tracks, hoping to see a light, but there was nothing. The train that was supposed to arrive an hour ago was still nowhere to be seen. Emily had been standing there for a long time, tired after a long hospital shift. Her back hurt, her feet were sore, and her mind was full of thoughts. She didn't have a home to go to tonight. After the small hospital she worked in caught fire last month. She had lost her room and most of her savings. Now she was traveling to a new town, hoping to start again. But fate had other plans that night. As she hugged herself to stay warm, a sound suddenly broke the silence, the slow, heavy sound of boots walking on snow. Her heart jumped. She turned quickly, her eyes searching through the fog. From the dark end of the platform, a man appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a long brown coat with a cowboy hat. His steps were calm but firm, echoing through the empty station. His face was half hidden under the hat's shadow, but his presence was strong. Emily froze for a moment. She didn't know him. Why was someone here at this hour? The man stopped a few feet away from her. Steam from the train tracks drifted between them, making the scene look like a dream. "Cold night, ain't it?" he said in a calm, deep voice. Emily didn't reply right away. She nodded slightly, still unsure if she should talk to him. Her instincts told her to be careful. But there was something gentle in his tone. He looked at her shivering hands and said, "You'll freeze like that. Here." Before she could protest, he took off his thick brown coat and placed it over her shoulders. Emily's eyes widened. "Oh, I can't," she began. But he interrupted softly. "You can. Nobody should stand alone in this kind of cold." His voice carried a strange warmth, like a quiet fire in the middle of a storm. Emily held the coat close to her body, feeling the heat soak into her cold skin. It smelled faintly of leather and wood smoke, strong but comforting. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded once. He looked around, then leaned against the post beside her, pulling his hat down a little. They stood there in silence for a while. The snow kept falling, and the old clock on the station wall ticked slowly. Emily glanced at him again. He didn't seem like a stranger who meant harm. His face was rough from the sun, his eyes tired yet kind. There was a sadness in his expression, like someone carrying memories too heavy to forget. After a few minutes, she finally asked, "Are you waiting for the train too?" He gave a small smile. "You could say that." His answer didn't explain much, but his voice carried something deeper, a story untold. Emily felt curious, but didn't push. She was too tired to ask more. The man looked toward the tracks. "Name's Jack," he said after a pause. "Jack Turner." "Emily," she replied quietly. "Emily Clark," Jack nodded. "Nice to meet you, Miss Emily, though I wish it weren't on a night this cold." Emily smiled faintly for the first time. "Me too." The wind blew stronger, lifting bits of snow into the air. The lamps flickered again. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked. The town seemed asleep, leaving the two of them in their own small world. A nurse and a cowboy, strangers in the snow, but deep inside, both carried something heavy: pain, loss, and loneliness. As Emily sat on the bench, pulling Jack's coat tighter around her, she noticed a scar near his hand, a long old mark across his knuckles. It looked like the kind of scar someone gets from hard work, or from protecting someone. She wanted to ask about it, but stayed quiet. Instead, she said softly, "You must be used to the cold." Jack chuckled lightly. "Maybe, but some nights still feel colder than others." His words sounded simple, but the meaning behind them felt deep. Emily looked at him again, wondering what kind of man he was. A wanderer, a worker, or maybe someone running from his own past. As the snow thickened, Jack looked down the tracks again. His eyes seemed lost in distance, like he was waiting for something or someone that might never return. Emily followed his gaze, feeling a strange sense of connection. She didn't know why, but she felt safe near him. even though they had just met. In that quiet, frozen moment, two lonely souls shared the same silence, one lost nurse searching for a new life, and one cowboy holding on to the ghosts of his past. The night was still long and the train had not yet come. But fate had already started its work, because what began as a cold night between two strangers was about to become the story that changed both of their lives forever. Snow kept falling, soft and steady, as the old train station grew quieter. Emily sat on the wooden bench, still wrapped in Jack's warm coat. The fabric was heavy, but it carried a strange comfort, a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time. Jack stood nearby, his hands in his pockets, his hat low over his face. The faint light from the street lamps touched the side of his coat, showing the wear and tear of years. He looked like a man who had traveled far, maybe too far. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The wind whistled between the broken boards of the platform. Emily's teeth chattered softly, but the warmth of the coat helped her breathe easier. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "You from around here?" he asked, his voice calm, deep, and kind. Emily shook her head. "No, I was working at a hospital in Willow Creek, but it burned down last month. I lost my room there, too." Jack turned his head slowly toward her. His eyes softened. "That's tough," he said quietly. "I'm sorry to hear that," Emily smiled weakly. "Thank you. I was lucky to be alive, really. I lost some friends that night. The smoke spread too fast. I've been trying to find work in another town." Jack didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to the snowy ground. When he finally spoke, his tone had changed, heavier, thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, "life takes everything from you before it gives you something back." Emily looked at him curiously. "You sound like you've lost something too." Jack's jaw tightened slightly. He gave a small, sad smile. "Someone," he corrected softly. "My wife. 2 winters ago." Emily felt her chest tighten. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, his eyes still on the ground. "She got caught in a storm while coming back from town. I waited all night. She never made it home." A moment of silence followed, long and heavy. Only the snow moved, falling quietly between them like the world itself was listening. Emily didn't know what to say. She wanted to comfort him, but no words seemed enough. Instead, she looked down, her fingers tracing the old benchwood. Finally, she said softly, "That must have been hard." Jack let out a slow breath. "It was, still is. Some nights I come here and wait. I don't know why. Maybe just to feel close to where I last saw her." Emily glanced at him with gentle eyes. His voice carried pain, but also strength, the kind that comes from living through loss and still choosing to keep going. For the first time, she felt that she wasn't the only one running from her past. The wind picked up again, and Jack noticed Emily's hair blowing across her face. Without saying a word, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a wool scarf, rough but warm. "Here," he said quietly. "You need this more than I do." Emily hesitated. "You've already given me your coat." Jack smiled slightly. "Guess I'm not very good at watching people suffer." Emily took the scarf slowly. Her fingers brushed his for a second. His skin was rough and warm, hers cold and soft. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them, not love, not yet, but a strange understanding. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't mention it," Jack replied, turning back toward the tracks. "You remind me of her, you know. She was kind, always helping people." Emily didn't answer. She just watched the snow fall. Her heart felt heavy and warm at the same time. After a while, she asked, "Why do you still come here, Jack?" He sighed, looking into the fog. "I guess I keep hoping I'll find peace one day. Maybe tonight." Emily tilted her head. "And what if peace finds you first?" Jack looked at her, then really looked. His eyes, tired and sad, softened again. For the first time, he smiled, not the polite kind, but a small, real smile. "Maybe it already did," he said quietly. The moment hung between them, simple yet powerful. Far in the distance, a faint sound broke the stillness, the low whistle of a train. Emily straightened up, eyes bright. "It's coming!" Jack nodded slowly. "About time." They both stood, brushing snow off their clothes. The sound grew louder, but something about Jack's calm face made Emily pause. He didn't look excited, he looked thoughtful. "Are you not going somewhere?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not tonight." My place isn't far from here. I just came to check if the train still runs on time. Looks like it doesn't, Emily smiled faintly. Nothing runs on time in weather like this. Jack laughed softly. It was the first warm sound she had heard all night. The train whistle echoed again, but the light didn't appear yet. The cold grew sharper, the air thicker. Emily shivered once more, pulling the coat tighter. Jack noticed and said, "You sure that train's still coming?" "I hope so," she said quietly. "I don't really have anywhere else to go." Jack turned toward her again, his expression gentle but serious. "Then maybe tonight you shouldn't go anywhere." Emily frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" Jack looked down the tracks, his breath visible in the cold. "Storm's getting worse. You'll freeze out there alone. You can wait at my place until morning. It's not much, but it's warm." Emily's heart raced. She didn't know this man. Yet something about his voice told her he was sincere. Still, she hesitated. "I don't even know you," Jack nodded slowly. "That's fair. But you can trust me. Or at least trust that I don't want to see you suffer." His words were simple but honest. Emily looked around. Empty station, dark sky, no train lights. She knew he was right. As the snow thickened, she finally nodded. "All right," she said softly. "Just for tonight." Jack smiled gently. "That's all I asked." Together, they walked down the snowy platform, two shadows under a silver sky. Neither of them knew that this short walk would change their lives forever. The wind grew stronger as Emily followed Jack down the quiet road that led away from the train station. The snow crunched softly beneath their boots and the moon hung pale above the clouds. Neither of them spoke much. The night was so silent that even their breaths sounded loud. Jack walked a few steps ahead, holding a small lantern that glowed warmly in the dark. Emily walked behind, clutching the coat close around her shoulders. She could still feel the warmth of his scarf on her neck and the kindness in the air between them. After a few minutes, she asked softly, "Is your house far?" "Not too far," Jack replied, looking back. "Just over that hill. You'll see the light soon." Emily nodded, her voice carried away by the wind. She felt nervous, but somehow safe. There was something about Jack, a quiet strength, a calmness that made her trust him. As they walked, she noticed the marks on his boots and the way his shoulders seemed slightly bent, as if the weight of his past still rested there. She wondered how much pain one man could carry and still be kind. Finally, a small wooden house appeared in the distance. A soft yellow glow came from one of its windows and smoke rose gently from the chimney. It looked warm, like the kind of place where stories were told beside a fire. Jack opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in," he said gently. Emily entered slowly. The warmth hit her face immediately. Inside, the house smelled of wood, smoke, and coffee. The walls were lined with old pictures, a few books, and cowboy hats hung neatly on hooks. "Sit near the fire," Jack said, setting the lantern on a table. He took off his hat and placed it on a chair. His dark hair was slightly messy from the wind. Emily sat on a chair near the fireplace. The flames danced softly, lighting her face with a warm glow. She stretched her hands toward the fire and sighed with relief. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Jack smiled a little. "It's simple, but it's home." He poured some hot water from the kettle into 2 mugs and handed one to her. "No tea, I'm afraid." "Just hot water." Emily took it with a small laugh. "That's more than enough tonight." For a moment, they just sat in silence, watching the fire. The warmth filled the room, but the silence was not awkward. It felt peaceful, like both of them were resting from a long, tiring day. Then Jack spoke, his voice soft but steady. "You said you worked at a hospital. Must have been hard work." Emily nodded slowly. "It was, but I liked it. I liked helping people. The night of the fire, I was on duty. I tried to save some patients, but..." She stopped, her voice breaking. "Not everyone made it." Jack looked at her with quiet sympathy. "You did what you could. That's what matters." Emily looked up at him. His eyes were gentle, filled with understanding. Not pity, just pure empathy. "How do you know?" she asked quietly. Jack leaned back in his chair. "Because sometimes doing your best is all you can do. I learned that the hard way." She tilted her head. "Is that about your wife?" He nodded slowly. The firelight flickered on his face, showing the sadness in his eyes. "Her name was Sarah. She was strong, just like you. Always helping others, always smiling, even when life was rough. The winter she died, I wasn't home. I was out fixing fences after a storm. She went to town alone to buy medicine for a neighbor's sick child. He paused for a moment. The silence grew heavy. The snow came faster than anyone expected. She never made it back. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Jack, I'm so sorry. He gave a small smile, but it was filled with pain. I blamed myself for a long time. I thought if I'd been there, maybe she would have lived. But you can't fight the wind or stop the snow. You just learn to live with what's gone. Emily wiped her eyes silently. The fire crackled softly, filling the silence between them. Maybe that's why I became a nurse, she said finally. I wanted to save people because I couldn't save my own mother. She died when I was little. I was helpless back then. I guess I wanted to make sure no one else felt that way. Jack nodded. We both carry ghosts, huh? Emily smiled sadly. Maybe we do. Outside, the snowstorm grew louder, beating softly against the windows. But inside, the fire burned bright, and for the first time in a long while, both of them felt warm, not just in body, but in heart. Jack stood up and threw another piece of wood into the fire. The sparks flew up and glowed like tiny stars. You can sleep here tonight, he said. There's a spare room. I'll take the couch. Emily shook her head. I don't want to trouble you. Jack smiled lightly. It's no trouble. The house has been too quiet anyway. Emily hesitated, then said softly, Thank you, Jack. You didn't have to help me, but you did. Jack looked at her for a moment, his eyes warm. Maybe I needed help too. Just didn't know it. Their eyes met again. Two broken souls slowly finding peace in each other's presence. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside that small wooden house, something had begun to change. The silence that once felt heavy was now gentle. The loneliness that haunted them both began to fade, replaced by something new, a quiet connection, like the first spark of light after a long night. As the clock ticked past midnight, Emily's eyes grew heavy. She whispered a soft goodnight and walked to the small guest room. Jack watched her go, his heart strangely full for the first time in years. He looked at the fire one last time and said quietly to himself, Maybe tonight wasn't just another cold night after all. Then he turned off the lamp and let the firelight fill the room, unaware that this simple meeting would change both of their lives forever. The morning light crept slowly through the window, soft and golden. Snow still covered the ground outside, shining under the weak sun. The storm had passed, leaving behind a peaceful silence. Emily opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The small wooden room, the smell of burning wood and the sound of birds outside made her feel strangely calm. Then she remembered in the train station the cold night, the cowboy. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. The bed was warm and comfortable. Someone had left a folded blanket near her feet. On the small table beside her, a cup of tea was waiting, steam rising gently from it. Emily smiled softly. He must have made this, she whispered to herself. When she stepped out of the room, she found Jack in the kitchen, frying eggs in an old pan. He looked up and smiled lightly. Morning, he said. Good morning, she replied, still a little shy. You didn't have to make breakfast, Jack shrugged. Couldn't let my guest go hungry. You slept well? Better than I have in weeks, she said honestly. He smiled again. Good, eat first. Then I'll take you to the station if the trains are running. Emily nodded and sat down at the table. The fire was still burning gently in the fireplace. The warmth felt like a hug after months of cold loneliness. They ate in silence for a while. Jack seemed thoughtful, his eyes sometimes distant. Emily noticed the way he looked at the empty chair across the table, as if someone used to sit there once. After breakfast, Emily offered to wash the dishes, but Jack shook his head. You're a guest, he said. While he stepped outside to get wood for the fire, Emily looked around the living room. The house was simple. Wooden furniture, old pictures, a few dusty books, and a guitar resting against the wall. One picture caught her eye. It was sitting on the mantel above the fireplace. Emily walked closer. It was a photograph of a woman, smiling, wearing a light blue dress. Her eyes were bright, full of life. The frame was old and slightly cracked. Next to the picture was a small silver pendant, a heart-shaped locket with a faint engraving that said, Forever yours. Emily touched it gently. Sarah, she whispered, remembering what Jack had told her. As she placed the locket back, her eyes fell on a small wooden box behind the picture. It was half open. Inside, she saw a few letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a ribbon. Something inside her told her not to look, but curiosity was stronger. She carefully lifted one of the letters. It was written in neat handwriting. Her eyes widened when she read the first line. "My dear Jack, if you're reading this, I hope you've forgiven yourself." Emily froze. It was Sarah's handwriting. Her heart pounded as she read a few more lines. "You always blamed yourself for everything, but you were my strength, my reason to smile. If I'm gone, I want you to live again. Promise me that one day you'll let someone in." Emily's throat tightened. She put the letter back carefully, her hands trembling. The letter wasn't just a goodbye. It was a message of love, a wish for Jack to move on. Just then, the door opened. Jack stepped in, brushing snow off his coat. He froze when he saw her near the fireplace, the open box beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them grew heavy. "I'm sorry," Emily said quickly. "I didn't mean to." Jack sighed deeply and walked closer. His eyes softened when he saw the letter in her hand. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You were bound to find it sooner or later." Emily looked down. "She loved you very much." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, and I failed her." "No," Emily said firmly. "You didn't?" Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with pain. "I wasn't there when she needed me most. I was supposed to protect her, Emily, and I wasn't there." Emily shook her head. "You couldn't have known the storm would come." He turned away, staring out the window. "Doesn't matter. I still hear her voice in my head every night. Sometimes I think I see her face in the snow. That's why I go to the station. That's where I last saw her." Emily took a step closer. "You're still waiting for her, aren't you?" Jack didn't answer. His silence said everything. She placed the letter back in the box gently. "She didn't want you to live in pain, Jack. She wanted you to live." Jack turned to her slowly. His eyes met hers, tired and filled with emotion. "How do I do that?" he whispered. Emily smiled softly, though her eyes were wet. "By forgiving yourself. By believing that love doesn't die, it just changes form. Maybe that's why you found me last night. Maybe it wasn't an accident." Jack looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then slowly his face softened. He let out a small breath and almost a laugh, but full of sadness. "You talk like you've seen too much of life." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." The room fell silent again. The fire crackled softly and the clock ticked on the wall. Finally, Jack said quietly, "Thank you for saying that. I don't know why, but when you talk, it feels like she's still listening." Emily smiled. "Maybe she is." For a while, they stood in silence, the two people from different worlds, yet bound by the same kind of loss. Outside, the snow began to fall again, light and gentle, like a soft memory touching the earth. Jack closed the wooden box and placed it back on the shelf. This time, he didn't look at it with sorrow. He looked at it with peace. As he turned back to Emily, there was something new in his eyes. Not love yet, but something close to it. A spark of life. And though neither of them knew what lay ahead, one thing was certain: the cold walls around their hearts had started to melt. By the time the afternoon sun touched the snow-covered hills, the world outside Jack's small ranch looked peaceful again. The storm had ended, leaving behind shining white fields and calm blue skies. Emily helped Jack clean up the kitchen after breakfast. They didn't talk much, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt gentle, like both of them were learning how to breathe again. Jack looked different. His eyes, which once carried only sorrow, now had a faint light in them. Emily noticed it and smiled quietly to herself. After a while, she said softly, "Maybe today's the day you stop waiting at that station." Jack looked at her, surprised. Then with a small smile, he said, "Maybe today's the day I start living again." They both laughed a little, and the sound of it filled the room, warm and real. Later that afternoon, Jack decided to check on his horses in the barn behind the house. Emily followed him, curious to see more of his life. The barn was old but strong, filled with the smell of hay and leather. Two horses stood quietly, their breath fogging in the cool air. "This one's Daisy," Jack said, patting the brown horse gently. "She's stubborn but loyal." Emily smiled and reached out to touch Daisy's mane. The horse lowered her head gently as if welcoming her. She's beautiful, Emily said softly. She likes you? Jack replied. Animals always know when someone has a kind heart. Emily blushed slightly and looked away. I guess they feel the same about you, Jack chuckled. Maybe. For the first time, Emily saw him laugh, really laugh. It was warm, honest, and it made her chest feel lighter. But peace never lasts long. As the afternoon faded, the sky darkened again. The wind picked up and a strange uneasiness filled the air. Jack stepped outside, squinting toward the hill. Something's not right, he murmured. Emily followed his gaze. Far in the distance, a black pickup truck was parked near the fence line of Jack's property. A man stood beside it, kicking at the snow and looking around. Do you know him? Emily asked. Jack's face hardened. Yeah, he said slowly. That's Mason. He's my neighbor and in trouble. What kind of trouble? Jack sighed. He's been trying to buy this land for months. I said no, it's all I've got left. He doesn't like hearing no. Before Emily could say anything, Mason started walking toward the house, his boots crunching loudly on the frozen ground. His face was rough, his eyes cold. Afternoon, Jack, Mason called out, his voice sharp. Didn't expect to see you playing host. Jack stepped forward calmly. What do you want, Mason? Mason grinned, but it wasn't friendly. Heard you had company. Thought I'd stop by and see who's keeping you from your lonely nights. His eyes turned toward Emily and his grin widened. Well, now I see. Emily felt uncomfortable. She stepped back slightly, but Jack moved closer, standing between her and Mason. Leave her out of this, Jack said firmly. Mason smirked. Relax, cowboy. I just came to talk about the fence line again. You're a bit over the boundary, you know. Jack's eyes narrowed. That fence hasn't moved in 10 years. You know that, Mason shrugged. Things change. Maybe it's time you sold this place. You can't live in the past forever. Jack's jaw tightened. This land isn't for sale, Mason chuckled darkly. We'll see about that. He turned to leave, but not before giving Emily one last look, one that made her skin crawl. Then he spat on the snow and walked away. When the truck engine faded into the distance, Emily looked at Jack, worried. Will he come back? Jack nodded slowly. Probably. Mason doesn't take no for an answer. That night the storm returned, weaker but loud enough to shake the windows. Emily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mason's eyes, his tone, the way he looked at Jack. Something told her he wasn't finished. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed outside, metal hitting wood. Emily jumped up from bed. Jack! She shouted. Jack was already at the door, pulling on his coat and boots. Stay inside, he said quickly, but Emily followed him anyway. The cold air hit her face like a slap. The barn door was wide open, swinging in the wind. One of the horses neighed loudly, frightened. Jack ran toward the barn and froze when he saw the fence broken, a section torn down completely. Footprints in the snow led back toward the road. Damn it, Jack muttered. Mason did this. Emily looked at the broken boards. Why would he do that? Jack's voice was low, angry. To scare me, or to force me to sell, but I won't let him. As he turned to close the barn door, Emily slipped on the icy ground. Her foot hit a loose plank near the edge of the platform. She gasped as she started to fall backward. Emily, Jack shouted. In one fast motion, he dropped everything and lunged forward, catching her just before she hit the frozen ground. His arms wrapped tightly around her, pulling her close. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind, the snow, even time itself. Emily's eyes met Jack's, her heart pounding in her chest. His face was inches from hers, his breath warm against the cold air. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded, still shaking. I think so. Jack helped her stand, his hand steadying her. For a long moment, they didn't move, just stood there under the falling snow, hearts racing. Then Jack looked toward the hills again. His jaw clenched. This isn't over, he said quietly. Mason's trying to push me out, but he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Emily looked at him, fear and admiration mixing in her eyes. What will you do? Jack turned back to her, his expression calm but determined. Protect what's mine, he said simply. And that includes anyone under my roof. As they walked back to the house, the snow fell harder, covering the broken fence, but not the danger that was still out there. Emily looked at Jack, realizing that beneath his quiet kindness was a man who would fight for what he loved. And in that moment, though she didn't fully understand why, she felt safe, because no matter what storm came next, She knew Jack would never let her face it alone. The next morning was quiet again. The snow had stopped falling, and soft sunlight covered the land in a golden glow. Everything looked peaceful, almost like the night before had been just a bad dream. Emily stood by the window holding a cup of warm coffee. The glass was cold against her fingertips and her breath made small clouds on it. She looked outside and saw Jack repairing the broken fence. His movements were steady, strong, and patient, the kind of man who never gave up no matter how hard life hit him. For a long time, she just watched him work. Something about the way he moved made her heart feel calm. He didn't talk much, but his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. When Jack came back inside, his coat and hat were covered in snow dust. He smiled lightly. "Fence is fixed." "For now," Emily smiled back. "You work fast," he shrugged. "You learn to fix things quick when you live alone. Weather doesn't wait for anyone." Emily looked down at her cup. "You shouldn't have to do it alone anymore." Jack paused, surprised by her words. His expression softened. "You're kind, Emily, but everyone's got their own road to walk." She shook her head. "Maybe, but sometimes two roads meet for a reason." Her voice was quiet, but it lingered in the air between them. Jack looked at her for a long moment, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. Then he just nodded slowly and went to hang his coat. Later that day, Emily helped him prepare lunch. She chopped vegetables while he boiled soup on the old stove, the small house filled with the smell of warm food and wood smoke. Jack sat down across from her at the table. "You're a good cook," he said. Emily laughed. "I just followed what you told me. You gave better directions than most doctors I work with." Jack smiled. "You're full of surprises, nurse." "Emily," she corrected softly. "Just Emily," he nodded. "Just Jack, then." For the first time, they both laughed together, like two people who had known each other for years instead of days. When they finished eating, Jack leaned back in his chair and looked out the window. "You know, I used to think this house would always be empty. After Sarah passed, I couldn't stand being here. Every wall reminded me of her. Every sound felt like a ghost." Emily listened quietly. "But now," he continued, "with you here, it feels different. Like the silence isn't so heavy anymore." Emily smiled softly. "Maybe the house was just waiting for someone to bring life back into it." Jack chuckled. "Maybe so." The room went quiet again, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels safe. Then Jack looked at her seriously. "What about you, Emily? Where will you go when the road's clear?" She hesitated. I don't really know. I lost my home in the fire. My job at the hospital might still be there, but I'm not sure I can go back yet." Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes when you lose too much too fast, it takes time to find where you belong again." Emily looked at him, her eyes soft. "And what if I haven't found that place yet?" Jack hesitated. His hands rested on the table, rough from years of work. Then he spoke slowly, carefully. "Then maybe you can stay here and for a while. Until you're ready. The ranch could use an extra pair of hands, and I wouldn't mind the company." Emily blinked, caught off guard. "You mean it?" Jack smiled gently. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't." Her eyes filled with warmth, and something else she couldn't name. For a long moment, she didn't speak. She just looked at him, seeing the truth in his eyes. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." He nodded. "Then don't, just stay if you want to." The next few days passed quietly. Emily helped Jack with small chores around the ranch, feeding the horses, cleaning the barn, cooking meals. They talked more now, laughed more, shared little stories about their lives. One evening, while they sat by the fireplace, Emily asked, "Do you ever think Sarah would want you to move on?" Jack's eyes softened. He stared at the fire for a long time before answering. "She used to say love doesn't die, it just changes form. I think she'd be happy knowing I found someone kind in this world again." Emily looked at him, her heart swelling. "You deserve peace, Jack." He turned to her, smiling faintly. "Maybe peace finally found me." Outside, the wind began to blow again, but this time it wasn't cold or cruel. It was gentle, whispering through the trees like a song. Emily wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and looked out the window. Snowflakes drifted softly past the glass, glowing in the moonlight. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel lost. She didn't feel alone. Behind her, Jack's voice broke the quiet. "Emily?" She turned. "Yes?" He looked at her, his eyes steady and calm. "Whatever happens next, I just want you to know. Meeting you that night wasn't an accident. It was the best thing that ever happened to me." Emily's throat tightened, her eyes glistening. "It was the best thing for me, too." They didn't need more words. The firelight flickered between them, warm and soft, like the beginning of something new. And in that quiet ranch under the blanket of a gentle snow, two broken hearts finally started to heal. Together. That night neither of them felt the cold anymore. Because sometimes warmth doesn't come from the fire. It comes from the people fate brings into your life when you need them most. Morning came softly over the ranch, painting the snow with shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed for good this time, and everything looked calm, pure and still, like the world was holding its breath. Emily woke early. She stepped outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The air was cold but gentle now. A thin mist floated over the fields, and the horses moved slowly, their breath visible in the crisp morning light. She looked around, feeling a strange peace inside her heart. It had been only a few days since that cold night at the train station, but it felt like she had lived an entire lifetime since then. Jack stepped out of the barn, his hat pulled low over his eyes, carrying a small bucket of feed. When he saw her, his face softened. "Morning," he said in his quiet, warm voice. "Morning," she replied, smiling. He handed her an apple. "For Daisy," he said. Emily laughed and walked over to the brown horse. "Good morning, Daisy," she whispered, holding out the apple. The horse nuzzled her hand and began to eat. Jack watched for a moment, then said, "She trusts you more than anyone." Emily turned toward him, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Maybe because she knows I'm staying." Jack froze for a second. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "You mean that?" Emily nodded. "I thought about it all night. I don't have a home to go back to, but this place feels like home now." Jack took a deep breath. The morning light reflected in his eyes, soft and full of emotion. "Then I guess this old house finally found its missing piece." Emily's heart skipped. Maybe we both did. They spent the morning working together, fixing small things, feeding the animals, making coffee. Everything felt simple but meaningful. After breakfast, Emily found an old wooden box sitting on the shelf near the fireplace. It was covered in dust but carefully locked. "What's this?" she asked. Jack looked up from where he was sitting. "That box belonged to Sarah," he said quietly. "I haven't opened it in years." Emily hesitated. "Do you want to open it now?" Jack stared at the box for a long time, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe it's time." He opened it slowly. Inside were a few old photos, a ribbon, and a folded letter. His hands shook a little as he unfolded the paper. The letter was simple. It said, "Jack, if you ever find someone who brings light into your days again, don't be afraid to let them in. Love doesn't end, it changes. Promise me you'll keep living even when I can't be there." Jack's voice broke slightly as he read the words. Emily placed her hand over his, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "She wanted you to be happy," Emily said softly. Jack nodded slowly, and for the first time in a long time, "I think I am." That afternoon they took a walk down the snowy path that led away from the ranch. The wind was calm, carrying the soft scent of pine and earth. Jack pointed toward the horizon. "See that hill? That's where Sarah and I used to watch the sunset." "Haven't been there in years," Emily smiled. "Let's go then." When they reached the top, the sun was beginning to fall, painting the sky with orange and gold. Jack took off his hat and held it to his chest. "I think she'd like this," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "I think she would too." For a long time they stood there in silence, watching the sky change colors. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was peace. As evening came, they walked back home. The first stars began to appear, small and bright against the deep blue sky. Jack opened the door and stepped aside for Emily to enter first. "Welcome home," he said softly. Those two words made her heart swell. She turned to him and said, "Thank you, Jack, for saving me that night." "For everything." Jack smiled gently. "Funny thing is, I think you saved me too." They both laughed quietly, and for the first time the house didn't feel empty anymore. It was full of warmth, laughter, and the kind of love that grows quietly, like the sunrise after a long night. Weeks passed, and word spread around the small town about the cowboy and the nurse. People who once called Jack the lonely rancher began to notice the light shining in his windows every evening. They'd see him and Emily riding together on the hills, talking, laughing, living. Their story became one of those tales that people whispered in the local cafe, about how a cowboy, broken by loss, and a nurse lost in the cold, found each other by pure fate. Some said it was destiny. Others said it was love's second chance, but to Jack and Emily it